When it comes to the California wildfires, there's some big updates to discuss based on what happened over the weekend, and there's also some interesting things in the weather forecast that will be driving our fire behavior over the next few days. So, the first thing I want to do is just take a look at the satellite imagery here, where the first thing I notice is that thick layer of smoke has returned to California, especially in Northern California and parts of the valley. You can see that there's a lot of smoke, and the reason for this is the winds were relatively weak over the weekend, which allowed to that smoke from our wildfires just to sit over the state. Now, the flip side of that is those weaker winds led to some reduced fire behavior, which was great to see. Now, when it comes to the air quality, you can see there are still some areas that are very unhealthy and even hazardous around the Castle Fire, the Creek Fire, and then up here near the August Complex and the North Complex. But if we look at the forecast for what it's saying should happen throughout the day today, you can see majority of California could be moving back into that moderate range with a few select areas where that unhealthy air continues. And then looking at the forecast for tomorrow, they have moderate air for the entire state of California. Now, I would say take this with a grain of salt, as we've seen in the past. A lot of times they overestimate how good the air quality is going to be. So I'd be a little wary that all of California should have good air quality by tomorrow. Now, the main thing driving our air quality is the upper level winds. And this actually perfectly explains what's going on right now. You can see we have weak winds over the majority of California, especially Northern California and the Valley. And what that's doing is just allowing our smoke from the wildfires to just sit over the area and then fall to the surface, which is unhealthy for us. But if we click through and look at what's going to be happening throughout the day today, you can see the winds increase a bit. Now, in the past, I've talked about the increasing winds leading to some extreme fire behavior, but for the most part, the winds aren't going to be that extreme. So what I'm hoping is the winds will be strong enough to push some of the smoke out of the area, but weak enough that they don't lead to any rapid fire spread. This is one thing I will note when it comes to the forecast for tomorrow. These winds are moving to be a lot more from a northerly direction. So that's going to take some of the smoke from the August Complex and the North Complex and push it down into the rest of California. So that's where I'm a little wary that it's going to be moderate air quality for the entire state. One other thing I will note that will come up later throughout this video is when it comes to the Bobcat Fire down here. So for all our Northern California fires, the winds have been weak, so we've had relatively weak fire growth, which has been great to see over the weekend. But when it comes to the Bobcat Fire, you can see the winds down in Southern California have remained relatively strong and have actually picked up in some areas. So the Bobcat Fire is the one that did see some rapid fire growth over this weekend. Now, the main weather system that's going to be driving our fires throughout this entire week is this high pressure system that's going to be moving in throughout the day today, and then it's basically sitting over California throughout Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Now, just to sum up in a couple sentences what this means, it's not that intense of a ridge, so we're not going to see those crazy triple digits we saw when all these fires just took off in the first place. The temperatures are going to be relatively moderate. They're going to remain warm, but for the most part, they should be in the 80s, which is exactly what we want to see. When it comes to winds, those will remain moderate too, and much reduced from what we saw last week when we had some of those red flag warnings. So when it comes to temperatures and winds, great news for our fires. The one thing I am a little bit concerned about is the humidity. Now, this is something we talk about a lot in these videos because dry air means dry vegetation, which means faster fire growth. And that is one thing that we will be seeing throughout this week as that ridge moves in. Throughout today, we got that dry air. Tuesday, the dry air continues. You can see the contrast between the western US and the eastern US. And then really that dry air is going to stick around all week as that ridge sticks around. So that's the main thing in the weather forecast that I'm going to be looking at. How intense will this ridge be and how dry will the air be? But again, great news when it comes to temperature and winds. Now, where conditions are a bit trickier is when it comes to the Bobcat Fire. So I'm talking about this one first because this had the most rapid fire growth over the weekend. It grew 45,000 acres in the last 48 hours, and you can actually see where a lot of that growth has happened. On this northern edge, you can see that this was the area where we saw the most rapid growth towards the end of last week, and it's actually appeared to calm down as it transitions into these lighter fuels. Again, that's the big thing that's been driving this fire. These fuels are critically dry, haven't burned in 60 years, so it's just interesting to see that it calms down the second it appears to get out of those thick, dry fuels. Now, where fire growth does continue is on this northwestern and northeastern edge, where you can see some of these hotspots outside of the previous fire perimeter. Now, that's been something that's been driving this fire. You get these winds that we have seen been pretty strong in the last 24 hours. They had some 30-mile-per-hour wind gusts, especially in the higher elevations. And what that does is it will actually come in, pick up a burning ember, and then throw it ahead of the fire. It's called spotting. And then because the fuels are so dry, there's about a 90 to 100% chance that one of these little spots turns into another small fire. So that's what's been driving a lot of the growth, and a large majority of that 45,000 acres we saw burnt over the weekend. Now, another area of concern with this one, really the key area I'm watching right now, is around this Mount Wilson area. We've talked about this before. There's an observatory and a communications tower on Mount Wilson, so that's been a key priority to really protect some of those valued resources. And you can see that the fire behavior has actually picked up in this area. That's mainly due to temperatures have remained warm down here. It's remained relatively dry, a little higher humidity than last week, but still dry. And there have also been an uptick in winds. Like I said, 30 miles per hour on some of the ridges, and you can see that has led to some fire growth. Now, so I'm actively watching that one. I know firefighters, probably as I speak, are trying to protect some of those resources. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Now, where we have some great news is on the southern edge. This was the highest priority towards the start of last week, and you can see why. It's by all these high population areas. But one thing you'll note, it's almost difficult to find a hotspot around this entire perimeter. And I did hear from a number of sources that this area of the fire is basically out, and they're currently just trying to mop it up and really secure the lines that they have put in place. Just strengthen the lines, make sure no little spot fires pop up out of nowhere. So the south, which was the highest priority, I would say is looking great. So when it comes to the Bobcat Fire, you can see it's up to 105,000 acres. Like I said, up 45,000 from the last update I gave on Friday. When it comes to containment, it's at 15% still, but the number of personnel is up to 1,700, which is good to see. So with that increased number in personnel, they'll be able to direct that to some of those high priority areas and hopefully get some good lines in. Now, when it comes to the forecast, you can see it's basically exactly what I was saying earlier. Temperatures are going to hover around the same mid to high 80s, possibly low 90s throughout the entire week. Temperatures and winds are basically staying the same Monday through Friday, at least hopefully they do, because they're relatively moderate, nowhere near those triple digits we saw last week, and the same is true with winds. Now, again, with all our fires, the thing we're worried about is this humidity as that ridge moves in and brings the drier air with it, but you can see it's showing that it's higher than it has been throughout all last week. Into the 30% range, that's certainly what we want to see. So while dry air is a concern, it's not as dry as we've seen in the past. And you can see the overnight recoveries are a lot better than we've seen in the past. Could be getting up to 90% in some areas. One thing I will say though, this is more a low elevation type forecast. Where we're seeing a lot of this active fire behavior is in the upper elevations, where we're seeing 30 mile per hour wind gusts and relative humidity in the teens. So don't get too excited seeing this forecast. Where the fire is actually burning, there's trickier weather conditions. So the next fire I want to talk about is the creek fire. And before we get to that, I'll just go over what's going on with the Sequoia Complex real quick, or also called the Castle Fire. For the most part, this one's looking pretty good. It only grew 13,000 acres over the weekend, which is huge because there was a few days last week when this thing was just taken off. Now, as I zoom in here, I believe the fire perimeter might actually disappear on me. Oh, it's sticking around. It wasn't doing this earlier. So you can see where it is actively burning on this northern edge and the southern edge. I know this southern edge is the main priority when it comes to this fire. There's some more populated areas on the southern edge, so they're working hard to get some lines in and really stop this fire in its tracks. Now, when it comes to the numbers with this one, you can see we're up to 135,000 acres and we're at 18% containment. Like I said though, and as this map shows, it has calmed down especially from what it was looking like last Tuesday and Wednesday when the smoke plume on this was reaching all the way up to the Oregon border. So that's good to see this has calmed down. Where that's actually, well, it's good news for this fire. It's actually not the best news when it comes to the creek fire. Now, the reason for that is the creek fire has actually been getting a protective layer of smoke over it because of the Sequoia Complex. So that smoke layer has been settling over the creek fire and has been leading to lower temperatures and lower winds, which has moderated some of the fire growth. Now, where we do still see some rapid fire growth is in this entire northern section of the fire. Main reason for that, there are some really dry, heavy fuels in this area. About 80 to 90% of the trees in this area have been killed because of bark beetle. So that's really what's been spreading the fire growth throughout really the entire history of this fire. One thing I will note though, this southern edge basically looks like it's out. It's almost hard to find any hotspots, although I do know they're keeping a close eye on this as the winds should be increasing over the next day or two, which should spread some of that smoke out of the area. Again, with those northerly winds, we're no longer going to get the smoke from the Castle Fire. So I'm going to be watching this closely to see, once that protective smoke layer goes away, what happens with our fire growth. Now, we can actually see what's expected to happen with our fire growth over the next 2 days by looking at the WRF S-Fire model. I've said this before, this is one of the best wildfire models in the entire world. It was developed by Adam Kochanski, faculty at San Jose State, and one of my professors. And it's basically one of the few models that pairs the fire with the atmosphere above it. So why that's so important is, as you can see, where you see some stronger winds is where you see some more active fire behavior. The winds really have a way of spreading the fire. And as you see those winds move in, that's where the fire appears to be growing the most. So something I like doing with this map is just going back to the beginning, pausing it, try to take a good look at where the fire perimeter is, and then if we go to 2 days later, you can see where it grows. You can see there's an area in the northern edge, the western edge, and then some growth expected on the south here. So I'm definitely going to be watching to see what happens with this fire as that protective smoke layer clears. Now, when it comes to the numbers for the creek fire, it's at 278,000 acres, and this one did grow 30,000 acres over the weekend. So this was one of our more active fires, and I believe a large part of that growth probably happened on Friday, where we still had some higher winds in the area. You can see percent containment is at 27%, so that's at least good to see. And I think that the percent containment is just going to continue to go up, and that's the main reason I think so. We now have over 3,000 personnel on this fire, the most personnel we've seen. I believe they've actually been taking a lot of the resources from some of our fires that haven't been as active and relocating them to this fire to really put this thing out, as it has been one of our more active blazes. As you can see, We're up to 855 structures destroyed with this one. Hopefully that number does not go up anymore with this. So we got 40 crews, 16 helicopters, 326 engines, 83 dozers, and 83 water tenders. Now the forecast for this one is actually looking great. Even though that ridge is moving in, they're forecasting that the temperatures should actually be going down over the next 5 days. And they're already pretty moderate. It's nowhere near those triple digits we've seen. It's actually around below the average this time of year. So it's just fantastic to see that the temperatures could actually even be getting into the 70s on Friday. So with all of our fires, temperatures and winds, not that much of a concern anymore. While it's still warm, while it's still moderately windy, the main thing we're really worried about is that dry air that's going to be moving in with that ridge. And this is one of the key things that's been leading to fire growth, especially for the creek fire, is these overnight humidity recoveries. Now, typically what we should be seeing with humidity in the nighttime hours is something like this. Humidity goes way up at night, and that's able to really help firefighters out because as that humidity goes up, the fire calms down, and they can really suppress it and get some good lines in. So what we've been seeing with the creek fire, and it looks like it's going to continue, is the humidity just stays the same overnight. So this leads to some active nighttime fire behavior. As you can see though, the actual humidity numbers are a lot higher than we were seeing last week. At least this is hopefully what will actually end up happening. Last week we had humidities in the teens and the 20s. So if we have humidities in the 30s, I'll take it. That's a lot better than we've seen. That's basically what's true with all our fires. When it comes to temperature, wind, and humidity, much better conditions than we've seen in the past and have led to some of those 100,000 acres burn days that we have seen with some of our fires. Now, when it comes to the North Complex, this is the fire that I'm actually feeling the best about right now. So again, I'm feeling the most wary about the Bobcat Fire. We had a lot of growth over the weekend. Winds and humidities remain tricky in that area. So I feel the worst about the Bobcat Fire. Again, still better conditions than we've seen in the past, so I'm not too worried about it. But the fire I'm feeling the best about is the North Complex. Now, first thing you'll notice, a lot of our hotspots have significantly calmed down from what this map was looking like last week. And over the weekend, I'm happy to say this fire only grew 6,000 acres. Now, why that's so significant is this is the fire that actually had some of the most challenging weather conditions, which with that red flag we saw last week, there was some 30 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts that were pushing from the south that really could have led to some rapid growth in the north here. And as you can see, the containment lines held. So that is great news. And if we didn't see super rapid growth with those 40 mile per hour wind gusts, we're probably not going to see it with some 20 mile per hour wind gusts. So while there is still active fire behavior in the north and northeast, this fire is looking pretty good. And again, only 6,000 acres burned over the weekend. Another area I'm feeling great about is this southern edge. This was the main priority as this is near some of the higher populated areas like Oroville. And you can see hotspots basically gone in this area. I know they're trying to just really secure their lines, get some last few firing operations in on both the south and north ends of this fire. And then they're actually starting to talk about repopulation. So I know they want to secure their lines around here, and then hopefully they'll actually be lifting some evacuations for some of the areas around this fire. As always, don't take my word for it. Be sure to check the CAL FIRE website. I put the link in the description. But if we start seeing some repopulation with this, that's some great news. So when it comes to acreage, we're up to 294,000 acres, but like I said, only grew 6,000 over the weekend. And when it comes to containment, we're up to 64%. So that is great to see. What is not great to see is when it comes to the damages and losses. You can see that structures destroyed is actually way up from what it was the last time I gave one of these updates. the majority of the increase in this number is not likely to due to new structures being burned. It's likely due to just a better mapping of what has burned in the past. And as always, there's a link in the description to a great map that CAL FIRE put together where you can actually click into the map and see what structures have been destroyed, which ones are still standing. I'm sure that'll be useful to anyone living in this area. So we have 2 injuries with this fire and unfortunately 15 fatalities. To put that into perspective, the North Complex is the 5th deadliest California wildfire of all time. So, as always, if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by this fire, my thoughts and prayers go out to you. So, when it comes to personnel, we still have over 3,000 on this fire. I believe this is one of the main reasons that they've really been able to control the fire despite those tricky weather conditions. And with better conditions this week than we were seeing last week, I believe that 60% containment number is just going to continue to rise. We got 58 crews, 26 helicopters, 253 engines, 81 dozers, and 82 water tenders. Now, something I will say about these helicopters, something that's been true for this fire and a lot of our fires for that matter, is that aerial operations have been at a minimum because the smoke has been so thick. Again, the smoke has been thick because those winds died down over the weekend, allowing the smoke to just sit over us. That's why we have some worse air quality right now. So that smoke and the winds are really a double-edged sword. While the smoke leads to a protective layer that keeps temperatures and winds down, it's also been obviously creating some bad air quality, but also hindering air operations. So it'll actually be good to see if the winds pick up a little bit and push that smoke out, they're going to be able to actually use those helicopters to put out some of these remaining hotspots. So that's exactly what we want to see when it comes to the North Complex. Now when it comes to the forecast for this area, this is also exactly what we want to see. Temperatures, they're moderate right now. It is warm, but it's not triple digits, and it's actually forecasted to go down throughout the rest of the week, really hovering in the mid-80s. So it's still warm. There are still going to be some winds, but it's nothing like we saw last week. One thing I will point out is tomorrow afternoon, they are expecting some wind gusts in this area. So I will be watching this fire around 3 p.m. tomorrow, as these wind gusts could be something to worry about. It's saying that they're coming from the south. So why that's important is southerly winds could act to push this fire north. But again, if they could handle 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts last week, I think they're going to have no problem with some 18-mile-per-hour gusts. When it comes to humidity, again, that ridge bringing in some dry air, so humidity remains relatively low. But compared to last week, again, great news. Last week we had teens and 20s, now it's looking like 20s and 30s. And we're actually going to have some moderate overnight recoveries. So that's great to see. Firefighters have been able to use some of these better nighttime conditions to really get some of those firing operations done to burn out some of the vegetation ahead of time so that by the time the fire gets north, there's no vegetation left because they've already burned it out. So overall, feeling great about the North Complex. Now, the last fire we'll talk about is the August Complex, and there's some good and bad news here. The bad news is that the fire continues to burn in the north and southwest, although I will point out it looks like it's significantly calmed down from what it was looking like last week. The main reason for some of this continued fire growth, it's in some steep terrain, it's in some heavy fuels, and with that steep terrain, it's hard to get crews in there to create some lines. And with the smoke being so heavy, they haven't really been able to do too many aerial operations. So I expect things will be looking up with this fire as the smoke clears, and they'll actually be able to get into some of those tricky terrain areas and use their helicopters to put some of these hotspots out. Now, where the great news comes in is the entire eastern portion of this fire has been declared contained. So they've actually been taking some of the resources from this eastern side and relocating them to where we still have some active fire behavior. Now, when it comes to the August Complex, it is at 837,000 acres. Again, largest wildfire in the history of California. Over the weekend, it did increase 13,000 acres, which, considering the size of this fire overall, 13,000 acres added isn't all that much. When it comes to containment, again, up to 34%, and I believe that's just going to continue to go up as they relocate some of those resources to where the fire is still burning. So, taking a wide view of our fires, the number one thing I want to point out here is just how insane this fire season has been. Over 3 million acres have burned this season, which is the most in recorded history. And when it comes to the top 10 fires, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are still actively burning. Now, I will say SCU and LNU are basically at 100% containment, so we don't really have to worry about those anymore. But August, North, and Creek, we're likely to see these numbers continue to rise, although I don't think we're going to see anywhere near the growth we saw last week and the week before when we had such tricky conditions. So just to put it into perspective, when we had a lot of rapid growth with these fires, it was 100 degrees, we had 30 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts, relative humidity was in the teens. Throughout the course of this entire week, at least hopefully this is true, temperatures should be in the mid 80s, winds should be more like 20 to 25 mile per hour wind gusts, and humidities could be in the 20s and 30s. So overall, I would say things are looking up. With that being said, I will continue to do these updates every single day to keep you guys updated on what's going on with these wildfires. And as always, if you're a member of CAL FIRE, the U.S. Forest Service, thank you for all the amazing work you do. And also thank you to San Jose State for basically teaching me everything I know about wildfire. Now, as always, if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by these wildfires, my thoughts and prayers go out to you, and thanks for watching.